All right, let's talk about something you use literally every second of every day, the straight line. But what if I told you that simple line is actually a beautiful illusion? That it's just a shadow of a reality that's way deeper and honestly a lot more interesting. And that brings us to this pretty wild quote. It says, "The line is a flattened, culturally distorted projection of a deeper reality." I mean, think about that. The idea that the line, our go to symbol for progress, for time, for everything, isn't fundamental at all. That it's just a simplification, a kind of cultural habit we've gotten into. And if that's true, well, it begs the question, what on earth is it hiding? So, to figure out what's being hidden, we first have to really see the cage we're in. That's what this first part is all about, what the source material calls the tyranny of the line. We're going to dig into how this one simple shape pretty much organizes and maybe even limits our whole world. I mean, just think about it for a second. Our whole lives are mapped out on timelines, right? We're always trying to climb some kind of career ladder. We measure success with these nice, neat progress curves. Even the stories we love follow a linear plot. And get this, our entire financial worth gets squashed down into a single number on a line, your credit score. Lines are absolutely everywhere, and we don't even question it. It just feels normal. And here's where it gets a little dark. The source calls the line a winner's symbol because what it does is take something incredibly rich and complex, like, say, human intelligence or someone's actual skills, and it just flattens it. It turns it into a simple, one-dimensional ranking. If you fit on that line, great, you're normal. But if you don't, well, then you're labeled as deviant or delayed or disabled. It creates this super simple and, let's be honest, often totally misleading hierarchy. Okay, so this slide really lays out the two big ideas head to head. On one side, you've got the line. It's flat, it's all about ranking people, and it's basically just a shadow of the real thing. But on the other side, we have this totally different, kind of radical alternative, the cavity or the hole. This shape is layered. It's about how things fit together, about integration. It's a shared space, not a race to the finish line. And the argument here is that this is the real shape we've been completely missing. All right, so if lines are just this thing we made up, this cultural habit, then what does nature actually use? Like, what's the actual blueprint for the living world? Well, as you're about to see, the answer is so much cooler than a boring old straight line. Just look at this stuff. It turns out nature almost never uses straight lines. It builds with networks, with lattices, with holes. You've got these huge underground networks of fungi. Our own bodies are just filled with these branching veins and arteries. Even our lungs trade oxygen through these crazy fractal patterns of little sacs. Life doesn't flow along a single path. It flows through all these connections and empty spaces. So, how do you even begin to describe these incredibly complex, hole-filled shapes? Well, you need a totally different kind of math. The tool for the job is called topology, and it's this amazing field of math that basically ignores all the stuff we learned in geometry class, like length and angles. Instead, it focuses only on the essential shape of something, like, you guessed it, the number of holes it has. It's why, to a topologist, a coffee mug and a donut are the exact same thing. Why? Because they both have exactly one hole. And topology gives us this really neat, precise way to count those holes. It uses something called Betty numbers. Now, I know, it sounds super complicated, but it's actually just a simple counting system. You've got beta 0, which just counts how many separate pieces there are. Then beta 1 counts the loops, like the handle on that coffee mug. And finally, beta 2 counts the completely enclosed empty spaces, like the inside of a beach ball. It's like a unique fingerprint for any shape's basic structure. Okay, so let's recap. The space all around us and even inside us is full of holes, not lines. Got it? Now here comes the big leap. What if the exact same thing is true for time? What if our whole experience of past, present, and future is also just this flattened out version of something way, way richer? Well, it turns out that some really cool neuroscience suggests our perception of a linear timeline is something our brain actually builds. There's this tiny part of your brainstem called the locus coeruleus, and it acts like a segmentation engine. It takes the nonstop fire hose of information from our senses, and it chops it up into little chunks, into events. Then our memory comes along and stitches those events together into a nice, neat, linear story. So the timeline isn't really out there in the world. It's a story we tell ourselves. And this is not just some abstract theory. There's some incredible research showing that for people who have been blind since birth, time often isn't experienced as a flat line at all. Instead, it becomes this rich, almost physical dimension, a space you can move through, that you can stretch and even fold. It's mind-blowing, and it just goes to show how flexible our experience of time actually is.
Okay, this is all fantastic as a theory, right? But how in the world could you ever measure a time cavity? It sounds impossible. Well, the researchers came up with this really clever, hands-on experiment to try and make these invisible ideas something you can actually see and measure. Let's check out how they plan to do it.
So here's the setup. It's pretty cool. A person gets an interface to control sound waves. Those sound waves then make a metal plate vibrate, and this plate is covered in sand. And what you get are these beautiful, constantly changing patterns in the sand. A camera records the whole thing, and then, and this is the magic part, special software uses topology to analyze the holes in those sand patterns, tracking how they appear, disappear, and change over time. Now, what's really important to get here is that this isn't some kind of mind-reading machine. They're not trying to decode specific thoughts. The real goal is to see if they can find a shared language of change. So if you ask a bunch of different people to do something abstract, like make the sound feel like it's taking a long time, do the shapes in the sand, those Betty curves, start to show similar patterns across all the participants? The big idea is to build a whole library of these shared dynamic patterns or motifs. And that brings us to what might be the most mind-bending part of all this. Because if we can actually identify these shared patterns of change, we might be on the brink of discovering a completely new kind of shared language. So what would that even look like? Well, here's an example. Imagine someone is trying to create a feeling of a sudden opening. When you look at the data from the sand, you might see a corresponding pattern, a really sharp, sudden spike in the number of loops. That's the beta 1 number. And then they all quickly disappear. That dynamic signature is the motif for sudden opening.
Or think about a shared experience. Maybe you get a group of people trying to create a feeling of a shared breath. Their combined influence on the sound might create this slow, rhythmic pulsing in the sand patterns, this gentle ebb and flow. That becomes the motif for a breathing field. You're essentially mapping a purely subjective, internal feeling onto a measurable, geometric fingerprint.
And that's really the ultimate prize here. The goal is to create a language that isn't based on static words for things that just are, but on dynamic descriptions for how things change. It would be a language of pure transition, of transformation, of becoming, a language literally built out of the shape of change itself. So, we're going to leave you with this final thought. What if we've been looking in the wrong place this whole time? What if the most important connections in our own minds, in our relationships with others, maybe even in the fabric of time itself, aren't in the solid things we can see and point to, but in the dynamic, invisible, and vibrant spaces between them?